I'm your host, Riri. Welcome to Reimagining Life from Pain to Purpose, where you'll find a community focused on resilience and perseverance, sharing untold stories of hope and rebuilding while dealing with major life interruption. This podcast is made by and for people in the process of reimagining their lives. We're here to raise the voices of those who often suffer in silence, living with chronic pain and/or disability. This space is for you. We encourage you to get involved. So stick around and let's jump right into the next episode. Welcome to episode 17, where we'll learn about ancient healing practice and how it can help people with chronic illness and/or disability. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Shri Shukla, who is certified in Ayurveda and holds a PhD in health social work. She helps people to live healthier lives through natural and integrative medicine and mind-body-spirit practices. As a published author and educator, Dr. Shukla brings over 15 years of experience to the health industry to our discussion. Her research has been showcased at prestigious events such as American Public Health Association and the Society for Social Work Research. She shares her personal journey of discovering Ayurveda after facing a serious health crisis at age 32, marked by extreme exhaustion and fatigue, unexplained by conventional medicine. Currently, at her health coaching firm, Viva by Shri, she is focused on supporting people with mental and emotional health through an integrative and holistic lens, integrating full-body approaches to mental health. Dr. Shri is able to speak from both a patient and healthcare provider perspective. So let's jump right into that conversation. Welcome, Dr. Shri. We're really excited to have you with us today. Could you please give our audience a little bit of information about you and your background? Do you have a chronic condition or disability yourself?
Okay, so my name is Shri Shukla. Thank you so much for having me on your platform. It's truly a pleasure. And I'm a holistic and integrative health practitioner. I hold a PhD in health social work from Rutgers, New Brunswick in New Jersey, where I specialize in HIV health services, reproductive health, mental health, health systems, so all things health. And for over 15 years now, I have worked in health spaces like hospitals, research centers, and international social work. I'm also certified in Ayurveda, which is an ancient healing system originating in India about 3,000 to 5,000 years old. It's both a philosophy based on the elements of nature and how they are also present within our body, and an ancient medical science. It was actually popular in the US back in the 70s. It became popular. It's very popular now as well. But it became popular in the US in the 70s because of yoga or yoga, which is a sister branch of Ayurveda. It's a sub-branch. It's like a branch. While Ayurveda is the tree and the yoga is the branch. And so Ayurveda is really the big umbrella system under which all of this comes today, which includes meditation, herbs, oils, food, spiritual practices, breath work. So this is all a very big system and it's all part of Ayurveda. But there's also like one can go be specialized in any of these as well. But it's an integrative system that works on the mind body.
That's interesting. I didn't know that they're all stemming from that tree. That's a cool image. Thanks.
Yes. To answer your second question, no, at this point, I do not have any chronic conditions or disabilities.
So it sounds like you've done quite a bit of training and you sort of meld together your social work, health training with the ancient healing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And what kind of training did you go through to become the Ayurveda, I don't know what you call it, practitioner?
Yeah, so I have 1 year of formal training. and then about 6 months of different certifications. And really, the biggest thing with Ayurveda is the practice of it, and it's the implementation and working with the diversity of people. I think that's what's more important.
So, what makes you a reimaginer? And by saying a reimaginer, I mean someone who had to, at some point, reimagine what your life looks like.
Yeah, so I was in the final year of my PhD program. This was about 7 years ago. And I was sitting on my bed in the morning, 10 a.m., and meditating. And I have always been a meditator. And somehow, half an hour later, while I was still now from sitting to in a very relaxed position, well, I woke up from the practice and I had like 6, 7 people in my room. And there was an ambulance, a stretcher, and my partner was standing in front of me. I couldn't recognize him. I was really shocked. And I didn't understand who these people were and why they were in my bedroom. And so that was just an initial shock. And then I was rushed to the ICU and I was told that there had been an ischemic stroke. So I was still very young. I mean, I still am, but I was 32 at the time. Yeah, so I was in the ICU for a few days, in the hospital for a week. And then I was returned home. I had a team of like 6 or 7, 6 physicians, I think, and then some additional like occupational therapists and other kinds of therapists. And so then I was really, the biggest shock to me was like I couldn't read or write anymore.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I didn't understand the letters that I saw in any book or my computer, and everything felt completely hazy is an understatement. I had speech defects. I couldn't talk properly. And the next 3, 4 months, I also had something called the pseudobulbar effect, the reflex crying. So I would cry without any reason, like apparent reason. I, of course, couldn't sleep anymore properly. I have about like 3 to 6 months of standard blood thinner medications that I was put on. And it was like a bit of, it was horrific.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. Then, of course, like the first 6 months, there was like all of these effects going on. Then there was like mental health effects as well. And then I was also connected with some therapists, and I didn't find that very effective for me personally. I think partly because they didn't understand the physical aspects of what I was going through. So I was, of course, on a lot of medication at the time. Yeah, those are the things that happened. I think, but around the 6 month time, I hired somebody who was like a spiritual mentor to me, and it was also like at every level it was a crisis because my family lives in India. So at every level it just was like, why me? And it was such a shock, and I was truly very troubled by the fact that I couldn't read or write. So yeah, I mean that partly answers what makes me a reimaginer.
Certainly. And have you talked about this before publicly?
Publicly, I haven't. So I think I haven't because I think it's just about like an emotional readiness.
Yeah.
Partly it's that, and partly it's because at this point in time, like I don't think about it and I don't talk about it so much with anybody. It's kind of in my past. I think the most important thing is with these kinds of conversations is emotional safety.
Yeah.
And I work with people. I must maintain confidentiality and respect their vulnerabilities. And people are vulnerable with me in this like supportive process. It's also important to me as a professional, like to create this emotional safety for others and to have it for myself in circles where there is a higher possibility of being better understood. It's also about like just building relationships, I think, because sometimes like people ask me to talk about different things, but we've not had any prior conversation. So I think a little bit of like rapport building and building emotional safety in the relationship is really important. And of course, like I want people to feel hope and courage based off my experience, but I also want to do it the right way to like have it right for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, first, thank you for sharing it with us and our audience. We are absolutely a supportive community, no matter what your situation is or was. I'm just curious, what made you feel like you wanted to share here for the first time on this podcast?
Like I said before, I think it's just like emotional readiness and a sense of safety and the fact that we've had conversations before.
Wow. So what happened after this sudden, shocking thing that kind of uprooted your life? So what happened afterwards, and sort of how did you, start to help yourself heal?
Yeah, so it was a journey really that led me to do all this work. So after the stroke, of course, like everything was disintegrated. It felt like everything was disintegrated, like all the pieces of my life. But I still intentionally, I continuously like worked on my healing journey. Yeah, it was just like step by step. And the first 6 months, I really didn't do anything much. I was just fully invested in seeing my 6+ more physicians and healers and health workers. And that was my life. After that as well, like things started to get better. I think it took 6, 7 months for me to start making sense of letters again. And my speech was starting to get a little bit better. So slowly things started to come back. And I think within like 18 months, then I was able to defend my PhD.
Wow.
Yes. Because like I was in the final year already. So that was just the timing of it.
Oh my goodness. That is incredible change. I mean,
Yes and no. So healing, like my journey was after the stroke, I think a certain amount of healing happened very rapidly.
mm-hmm.
But there were still some things that didn't fully heal. And I mean, I will talk about that a little more. But some things happen very fast because there's neuroplasticity, there's all the medication working, and there is so many different things going on. There was also like I started to make dietary changes and just a lot of lifestyle changes I made because, well, I wasn't doing anything much other than that. It was a full time job.
Oh, absolutely.
So at the time, I think so all of that added to my recovery. Yeah, so the healing was not complete at that point. It was just like having healed enough to be able to do certain things and there were certain benchmarks that I had met, but it was not a complete recovery at that point.
And so what happened through your healing process after that? Can you give us sort of an 5,000-foot view?
Yeah. So the thing is, like at the time, we were looking to start a family. And so the first thing that came up in the recovery process was like I told all my physicians that this is what like we were thinking and this is how we were planning for it. So everybody knew, like all my physicians knew about this. But I was getting help from some areas, but I was also feeling really disappointed in some areas. Like for the mental health piece, I was fairly disappointed because the therapist that I was going to I didn't feel helped at all. And that's, like I said before, it's probably because they didn't understand the physical aspects of what I was going through. And
Mhm.
so I started to do my own research about what I could do. There were like some really simple things that I came across that I started to implement on my own. And like just simple things, like walking when I could and taking a walk, just eating cleaner. Then one of my physicians, my neurologist, had recommended that I do a keto diet. He said it has helped many of my patients. I implemented that and I actually found that very helpful in the recovery stage because, yeah, it's a high fat diet and it's said to be helpful for any kind of brain injury. I did find that helpful. It's not a sustainable diet. I don't think anybody can just eat high fat for a long period of time, but it did make me feel a lot better in that particular phase.
It's a lot to deal with.
Yes, it was a lot to deal with. My sleep was, of course, like it was very disturbed. I would wake up at 3:30 a.m. every night. It was weird. Yeah. There was a specific time. Yes, it was strange. Uh, but those things also started to get better. So, like, I think it was a journey. I think I had some recovery show up for me that sort of helped me stabilize, but there were many pieces that didn't happen till up to 2 years.
Yeah. And at that time, were you an Ayurveda practitioner or not yet?
No, I wasn't. So I was randomly like applying because I come from India and Ayurveda it's a traditional medical system commonly practiced. It's also done at a variety of levels. So one can be like a Ayurvedic doctor, but then it's also used in the households. People understand these things. So, like just coming from family, I started to apply a few things randomly, and it helped me a little bit. And then what really remained for me for a very long time was a phenomena called post-stroke fatigue. So, and that really brought down the quality of my life. Like it's a very strange feeling to just like walk around feeling exhausted for no apparent reason.
Yeah. I think, a lot of us have that experience.
Yeah. And it's so hard to explain because like I was still very young and my physicians expected rapid recovery for me because of my age. And I did recover. I mean, I was like written off from some of the physicians, and like I'm still seeing them, but I was sort of like the course of medication is complete, so this is done, this is done. So they were meeting their checkpoints, but I was not meeting my checkpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the post-stroke fatigue went on for quite some time, and that's when I got more invested in Ayurveda because I was like, I can't. I mean, there has to be a way out of this. And then I started to make more changes. And then I took some herbs and I did a lot of different things. And yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic journey.
Wow. Do you feel like the Ayurveda helped you more than the other things you tried? Or did it sort of complement them?
For me, it complemented them. But here's the thing, like at this point in time, I'm completely medication free.
Wow.
Right. And so I'm completely medication free because I did certain things simultaneously. I mean, of course, I was on medication, but also because I had gone through a pregnancy. My medications were continued through the pregnancy because, like, some of them, not all of them, but a few of them were just because to be on the cautious side. But at this point, like, I don't take anything. So that's worked out really well for me.
And so, how do you feel these days?
These days, I feel good. I feel good. I feel very balanced. Yeah, I'm really in a very good place in my life. I mean,
That's wonderful.
yeah, there's like the physical aspects. I think there's also learning because I've learned so much about like I've been so invested in my own work and also now that I work with other people, there's certain things that we integrate over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's a process.
Yeah.
What would you say you learned from this experience, professionally or personally? Both.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is that energy management is very important in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
The reality that hit me at the time was that, our achievements don't mean much if we are losing our health and well being in the process.
Yeah.
Because if you think of it like our success comes from us, it comes from our mental, emotional, and physical vitality.
Mm-hmm.
And if that vitality doesn't have a sustainability to it, then our achievements might not be sustainable either.
Absolutely.
Of course, there are many, many definitions of success and achievement, and it's a very personal thing at the end of the day. And I think professionally, this life incident eventually has ended up expanding me intellectually, mentally, emotionally. My perspective on health and well being is much more broader now than what it was when I was doing other work. I mean, that was important too, but now it is more expansive. And I think that's also partly because like I have persisted and I have channeled my curiosity, I've channeled my spirituality, I've channeled my resilience, and I've channeled different aspects of my being into this work. There was one more thing I want to talk about. Like, I did have fear in me, and there's good fear and bad fear. And I won't deny, like, it was a really good kind of fear that I had. And I knew that, like, I had a whole life ahead of me, and I really felt like I was going to decide the quality of my life. So I didn't have like fear of dying, but I was afraid of not being able to like just read, write, do things, talk properly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we can like channel negative emotions like fear into positive action and in the positive direction. And also I knew that like after the physician work is done and no one was going to come and check in with me except for my family, of course, but like medically and clinically speaking. So it was just like between me and me.
Right. Wow. Your experience has to be so strong. And of course, it changed you and your approach and the way you understand things and compassion and all of that. I mean, I think we all speak to that. Like, yeah. I wanted to ask you, when you said energy management, what do you mean by that?
So we've all heard of like energy being renewable, right? So this is also true somewhat of like the human energy system. Like we can run so fast, or we can think so fast, or we can do certain things like physically, mentally, emotionally. Everybody has a threshold. And it can take a while to like understand what that threshold is for that individual. And we find some of these clues about energy management within Ayurveda, but ultimately it's like a very personal thing, and it's
right.
It can be learned. That's the beauty of it.
It sounds like you kind of became your own advocate. You were certainly doing your own research, trying to find ways to help yourself. So did you have any lessons learned that you could share about becoming your own advocate and having to sort of, find ways beyond what just medical doctors are telling you? How'd you learn about that to do it?
In the beginning, I think I was just assertive. Working with a team of physicians, there's nothing very easy about that, especially when one is low on energy themselves and they are actually sick and they still have to make those doctor's visits and do all of that work. So one thing is being assertive, it's asking questions, being prepared to ask questions. I used to take notes about what I want to ask and what kind of conversations I want to have. That's one form of very immediate advocacy that everybody should be doing for themselves. And then at another level, I was able to advocate for taking 1 year off in my program. So that was granted to me, and I took 1 year. I was delayed by 1 year after the stroke. So that was another form of advocacy I did. But I would say I was not the very best advocate because I looked very fine on the surface. And I was young. So I think that constantly came in the way of being accepted or people really understanding what I was internally going through. Because even everybody I met after that would just feel relieved that I looked fine on the surface.
Yeah.
And they were genuinely glad for me. And I think I understand that now because with stroke, a lot of different things can happen to us physically. And of course, that's really important. It's an important indicator, but it's not everything. It's not complete because somebody could still be looking completely fine on the surface and just going through a lot of things, which can be very debilitating and crushing. And so this whole thing about the invisibility of illness, that was really coming up for me because and in the beginning, I was not a very good advocate because I was just I had all these speed things and the crying. So I just stayed at home. I didn't mingle with people because I could cry anytime for no reason. So that's really, it's not comfortable being with many people then. So just those times, yeah. So it took me a while, but there were definitely phase that initial phase was really hard. And I think that's the kind of phase when we really need other people to advocate for us, whether they are physicians, they are their family, friends, professional co-workers, and having that community together. It's so important in that initial phase when the person is kind of dependent in a way.
So true. Yeah. And I hear that a lot talking with people that having an invisible illness or disability is really hard because, right, everybody just says, well, you look great.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's can be a facade. So what do you think has been the most difficult challenge for you on your journey? Were there specific people that helped you work around them?
Yes, there were people. I think in general, there was no one person, but the kindness of many people at different points in time accumulated over a period of time. Like I shared earlier, my neurologist telling me about the ketogenic diet, that was very helpful when I had no idea what to do. And I had a very wonderful occupational therapist. I'm still in touch with her, and not for professional reasons, but just because she's just a lovely person. And I did hire a spiritual mentor around the 6-7 month mark because I was in a very, very, like in a, how to explain this, but it was like a tunnel, like a really dark tunnel, slimy tunnel, where I constantly felt like I was just spiraling down. At that point, I didn't really see how I could move up. So that was very helpful to me. And so I couldn't still like do a lot, but she would like just talk about things like there's dharma, there's karma, like duty, there's action, like the things that we have to do for ourselves, the things that we have to do for others. I was always into meditation, like before the stroke. But somehow, because I was meditating at the time of the stroke, I couldn't get myself to meditate again. So because I had that like psychological thing that there was something off about the meditation, but it really had nothing to do with the meditation. That was just a coincidence. Like I used to meditate so often that if something was going to happen, it could happen during a meditation. So, but like I had to rebuild on meditation because it is a very good tool for any kind of brain recovery.
Absolutely.
So I had to also like reestablish my relationship with the meditating piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that. I mean, it took me some time and it took some hand holding, but I was able to like do that. And then, of course, like my family has always stood by me, even though they were living abroad. They came temporarily to visit me and they took care of me initially.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
So yeah, that was all of the help. And the most difficult was really the first year after the stroke. That was the hardest part. Like when I couldn't read and write, that was the hardest part.
Absolutely. Can only imagine. So, did the doctors, I'm thinking of like the more Western medicine, did they have an explanation for what caused this or no?
Yes. So, of course, like on the surface, it was a blood clot.
Uh-huh.
And sometime later, my physicians also explained to me that the oral contraceptive pill, the OCP I was on, was probably not the best for my system.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it was discovered after the stroke that my blood pressure was high. So, when I was prescribed the OCP, probably 6 months before or 7 months before the stroke, no one had really checked my blood pressure. And I should have been on BP medication like maybe 6 months or a year earlier. Now, like that's the clinical cocktail going on in my body at the time, right? Like there's the oral contraceptive pill, and there's the slightly higher blood pressure, and there's like this slight light metabolic syndrome going on in my body. But then there was like the other piece of mind always being on, like switched on in big capital letters, right? And I was not cooking a lot those days. I didn't sleep enough, even though like there was no reason for me to like not go to sleep, but it was just like, oh, let me work on something, let me perfect this little piece of analysis, and let me do this. And I also used to travel. So, like, all of that together is a pretty deadly cocktail in the body.
Yeah.
So, my body was like obviously looking for a way to revolt, and she did.
She did. Wow. So I'm curious, you mentioned your sleep a lot. What role do you think trauma and sleep have in your experience on the whole body wellness?
So, sleep is very, very important. Trauma will rarely not affect sleep,
Mm-hmm.
but trauma, the severity could differ, the shape, the form, the length of the sleep, and how it's affected. Like all of that could differ from person to person. But it's very rare that trauma will not affect sleep. Sleep is also a very, very important component in Ayurveda. Trauma being an external imposition on the body, but the way it really connects with sleep is like it could lead to excessive sleep for some people. For others, it could lead to suppression of an urge to sleep. And for some others, like people want to sleep during the day. And these different forms are seen as problems with sleep. Of course, there's insomnia, which is like a complete inability to sleep at
Right.
night. But like there are all of these different disturbances that trauma can cause to the sleep wake cycle. It did for me, but I had a peculiar issue of just waking up at a certain time and then like having poor sleep from then on. It was peculiar. And of course, like I think it was partly a trauma response as well
Mm-hmm.
from everything else that was going on. But sleep is like, I know modern science talks about it. there's so much of research on sleep. But also, ancient Ayurveda is very clear on the importance of quality sleep. And there's also practices of like relaxation techniques. There's meditation, there's also yoga nidra. So yoga nidra it's a kind of meditation, but it's also, it can be done during the day, and it's not actually putting the person to sleep, but it's like very restful for the body so that they can rejuvenate during the day. Yeah, so I think there's a very like clear communication between ancient and modern sciences in these pieces.
Yeah, clearly.
And I'm very fond of those areas. Like even in my fertility work, like I'm always looking for like how can we put modern science conversations with ancient Ayurveda. And it's not a perfect conversation because of course like there's a lot of translation involved from like the Sanskrit side and things like those. But it's not perfect, but the concepts they broadly do end up being similar in some ways.
That's interesting. Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you because it sounds like you have a good way of melding the two together. And I was wondering, in your more professional role, how do you work with very complex medical situations for people who have chronic illness or disability? Do you work with Western medicine or?
Yeah, so for every practitioner, it's important to put limits to what they want to do and why.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's impossible to be an expert at everything, medically speaking, but there are full body situations for which Ayurveda is amazing. To answer your question, it's completely on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
So there is no perfect answer to this. It really depends on the situation and the condition of the person and what illness, what kind of problem they're really facing. In general, there are many herbs which can be used alongside mainstream medical interventions, and they should be used.
Okay.
But when an illness is not advanced, then a person can actually work completely on natural medicine alone. It can also be very good for like unexplained full body issues, like my situation in the post-stroke fatigue, even for mental health or for fertility or for mental health, like full body rejuvenation, or to beat stress. Like these are excellent situations to work with Ayurveda without going to mainstream medicine. But when the disease is advanced and it has progressed, it has manifested fully, then it really depends on what drugs the person is on. So, for example, when I was on high blood pressure medication after the stroke, I continued my course. Like I continued to stay on my medication. But then I also started using herbs and I started to do a lot of different other things. So eventually I was now able to completely get off the medication. Sometimes the two systems can work together,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes there's a range of conditions that can be resolved in this way, especially when the disease is not too progressed. So yes, I was like on a high blood pressure medication, but it's not so high that at this point anyway, like it's completely resolved. But that said, I do believe that there are certain situations in which it might be better to not mix the therapies.
And could you give us an example of the type of situation that might be?
So I don't have a very good answer for that. I think it might be like, so food, we can always, here's the thing, like you can always work with Ayurveda because herbs have a specific function. And for a moment, if we kept the herbs aside, you can still work with you can work with meditation, you can work with breath work, you can work with yoga, and there's specific postures for certain situations. You can basically do a lot of things which will be under the umbrella of Ayurveda without actually getting specifically going to the herbs.
Okay.
Right. So you could still use Ayurveda, but where the herbs specifically are concerned, their mechanism of action is a little different it's certainly different from mainstream medicine. But these are like non comparables. We can't really compare these things.
Yeah.
Because plant medicine works very differently. But that said, there are certain things that might just be like, it really depends like on what the food situation is and what else is going on. But there might be situations for sure in which it's best to like not mix the therapies. And I think think of it like new drugs are coming up, new compositions are coming up. So it's hard for me to say what exactly that would be.
Sure. Right. And so I'm thinking about you as your professional hat on,
Mm.
what's been your experience working with reimaginers with Ayurveda?
So, just speaking very broadly from my experience, I think it's very evident to me at this point that people's beliefs about healing, their mind body, deeply mediates and moderates in terms of modern research with their healing journey. So, the extent to which one can heal is not just physical, but it truly is about like letting go of attachments to what our life should look like. It could look like maybe radical forgiveness for someone, look like letting go of emotional attachments. It doesn't matter what we're having to give up or what we're having to integrate back into our life. But I think like this whole thing about like believing in our body is a very important piece in anybody's healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it's not a linear journey because like the body is going to do its own things, but we have to like keep trusting her and keep believing her and keep showing love and keep showing respect. And I think that's a really important piece. And I see the difference. Like people are sometimes skeptical when they come to me, when they have conversations with me and they work with me, they start to feel differently. Because like we still have to be that very primitive human. We have to channel that primitive human in us who has to channel that intuition, who has to channel that good old fashioned listening to one's body.
Yeah.
Right. That layer of work is important. But then there is like this other layer also. Like sometimes we just eat the wrong things, even though we think our body is telling us to eat them. But if your body is adapted to eating things that she shouldn't be, then she's just gotten like used to it because habituation happens to everybody.
Right.
Right. So like there are different layers to this work. Like you have to do the listening and believing work and the intuition guiding work. But then there's also like this very practical line of implementing the right things and putting in the work for the practices. So I think like when people are able to combine these two things, this is one of the things that I love observing and I love like watching this. It might take different lengths of time for different people. But yeah, it's an important aspect. It's important to believe that our bodies can heal.
I think that's very well said. And I think everyone probably agrees with that. So I know that this varies with each person, but I'm wondering if you could give an estimate how long you think it would take for someone to start feeling real progress from making the kind of Ayurveda lifestyle changes, or whether it's nutrition or whatever it is.
I don't think there is any particular timeline. Like every mind body system responds at their own pace, depending what's going on and depending on what their external resources look like.
Yeah.
And how supportive their environment is. But that said, I think depending on the situation, like people can really start to feel better in days.
Wow. Okay.
Definitely, like it could take weeks or even a year, like in my case, but we will see some progress. We will see progress. Like everybody has like different, depending on how big the journey is and what goal has to be, what outcome we're looking for. I think that matters, but it's possible to feel better within days. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
It can work fast because your body is always responding. She's responding to what you eat. She's responding to whether you slept last night or not. She's responding to that conversation you had with your boss right now. She's always responding. So think of it like if you give her just 1 week of renewal, she responds pretty fast.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's helpful for people to hear because often I think it might be like, I'll give this thing a try, but how long is it going to take to know if it works? And so I think if people are given an estimate about, you might start to feel some difference after this amount of time, I think that might help them, dedicate themselves more to doing it.
Yeah, I think instead of like being committed to the outcome or like the big change, we should be invested in like feeling better on a daily basis. I think that's the important piece.
So true. Okay. Now we've come to our rapid fire 5 for 5 questions. Please answer honestly and quickly, whatever comes to mind. So the first one is, what's your favorite sound?
I love the sound of birds.
Nice.
I have some birds like who chirp around here very often where I live, and it's music. It's amazing. I love it.
Absolutely. What's your favorite word?
My favorite word is love.
What's your favorite guilty pleasure? Or it doesn't have to be guilty. Just
Oh, dark chocolate.
oh, yeah, it's a good one. And what's something that you've learned that you wish other people would understand?
Abstract things. It's just one word, but the one word is abstract. It's really like abstract thinking, abstract doing, abstraction, imagination, moving forward. Things in your mind is very important. It's amazing. It can do good things.
Okay. Yeah. And the last question, what advice would you give to an 18-year-old you?
Eat more because you're beautiful.
That's lovely and supportive.
Yeah.
Okay. You've passed our 5 for 5. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So those are really the questions I've had. Do you have anything else you wanted to share?
There's a lot of different shapes and forms that hurdles can take, but I feel like it's really important to focus on like the emotional and mental reimagining, as your podcast is named, that one has to do, and to really find like new and creative ways to live a different definition of a good life. And like within those limits, some of which are like typically perceived limits in a new life situation, like find ways of freedom, self expression, and empowerment, and always hold radical self compassion and radical self acceptance. Because I really feel the reimagining bit that you're bringing to the work that you're doing. And yeah.
Thank you. I love the radical acceptance.
In this episode, we learned about Ayurveda, an ancient healing practice dating back thousands of years in India, and how it's the umbrella under which so many now common practices fall. Ayurveda includes meditation, yoga, breathwork, herbs and oils, and spiritual work. Dr. Shri also shared about her personal healing experience after a severe medical condition. Following her medical crisis, Dr. Shri had to learn how to read, write, and speak again. This is the first time she's talked about her personal experience, and she spoke about feeling that she's in an emotionally safe place now and wanted to share her story in the hopes that it helps others have hope and courage that they too can get through major challenges. Dr. Shri believes one of the things that made her healing so successful was the combination of so many approaches to healing, both Eastern and Western medicine, spiritual healing, and lifestyle changes. In our conversation, Dr. Shri reflected on a number of wise points about going through this type of traumatic journey. First, she spoke about how critical energy management is, and that no matter your achievements, they don't mean much unless you have your health. She also spoke about embracing good fear. That's the fear you can overcome, and how experiencing this medical crisis really expanded her view and understanding of life, health, mental health, and Ayurveda. Dr. Shri also talked about the importance of becoming your own advocate, suggesting writing down all of your questions before your appointments and being assertive to get all the information you seek. She also spoke about the difficulty and lack of understanding some people had because her health issues were invisible. So whenever a doctor or practitioner saw her, they would say, "Well, you're young and you look good." This is a common thread we have heard in many discussions. That age-old saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover," is still quite relevant and needed. Dr. Shri reminded us all that a key to success is believing that your body can heal and that healing is not a linear process. Thanks for listening to Reimagining Life from Pain to Purpose. We're always interested to hear your feedback and questions. So leave a review and drop us a note at reimagininglifepodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. We hope you'll tune in for the next episode.